The lights in the CNN studio were blinding. The tension was suffocating. It was a rare, high-profile interview night, just 2 years before the 2028 election. The topic was simple: national unity. But the energy? Explosive. Vice President J.D. Vance sat calmly across from Kamala Harris, who had just returned from a series of global appearances that critics said were tone-deaf. The anchor barely got through his first question before Kamala leaned in, interrupting. "Let's stop pretending, J.D. You talk about values, but where were your values when mothers were crying at the border, when kids were dying in schools?" The room went cold. A sharp gasp echoed from the audience. Even the camera operators hesitated. J.D. Vance blinked slowly. You could see the pain in his eyes. His knuckles tightened. Not from anger, but from something deeper. This wasn't just a debate. This was personal, and the world was about to witness something unforgettable. What Kamala didn't know was that J.D. Vance had just visited a hospital the night before, and that visit would change everything. Just 18 hours before the debate, J.D. Vance had quietly walked into St. Francis Memorial in Ohio. He wore no cameras, no press, no political aides. In room 214 was a boy named Evan, 9 years old, terminal cancer, breathing through a mask, and holding a crumpled American flag in one hand, and a hand-drawn picture of J.D. Vance in the other. The boy's mother broke down in tears as J.D. entered. "He watches your speeches before every chemo session," she said. "You give him hope." J.D. Vance sat on the edge of Evan's bed. He didn't say much, just listened. Evan whispered, "Promise me something. Don't let them forget about people like me." J.D. choked back tears. "I promise." He left the hospital that night with Evan's drawing folded in his jacket. The next morning, he placed it in his inner coat pocket over his heart. Now, on live TV, Kamala had no idea she had just insulted the man who was carrying the silent voice of a dying child in his suit. The audience didn't know either, but J.D. Vance remembered, and he was about to speak. Kamala leaned back smugly, her words echoing in the studio. J.D. didn't answer immediately. The silence was so long the moderator almost spoke, until J.D. raised his hand gently. His voice was quiet, but clear. "Madam Vice President," he said slowly, "last night I sat with a 9-year-old boy who begged me to be his voice because he knew he wouldn't live long enough to vote." The studio froze. J.D. reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Evan's picture. "This was drawn by Evan. He died an hour ago. He told me not to forget kids like him. And you want to talk about values?" Kamala's face went blank. J.D.'s hands trembled slightly as he held the drawing up to the camera. "You talk about pain like it's a statistic. I live it. I carry it. Don't confuse quiet with weakness." Viewers at home began to cry. Twitter blew up instantly. The moderator couldn't speak. Kamala couldn't either. Her confident smile had vanished. J.D. Vance didn't shout. He didn't insult. He just told the truth, and it shattered the room. The studio lights were still bright, but the energy had shifted. Kamala Harris sat frozen, her lips slightly parted, as J.D. Vance gently folded Evan's drawing and placed it back into his pocket. Not a single person in the studio dared to breathe too loudly. The moderator, once lively, looked down, unsure how to steer the moment back to politics. J.D. looked at Kamala again. This time, there was no anger, just a kind of sadness that made millions watching from home tear up instantly. "You asked about values, Kamala," J.D. said quietly. "You questioned mine on live television. But values aren't just slogans. They're who you are when no one's watching. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to speak for a boy who couldn't." Kamala reached for her water. Her hand shook. Somewhere in Michigan, a mother watching with her daughter began to cry. In Georgia, a retired veteran turned off his TV and whispered, "That's a real man." But the night wasn't over. Because as the producers scrambled behind the scenes, Kamala's team sent a message to her earpiece. "Go harder. Don't back down." 30 seconds later, Kamala straightened her posture. She nodded to the moderator, and then, with a sharp breath, leaned forward again. "I'm sorry for your loss, JD," she said. "But emotions don't govern nations. Logic does. And frankly, one sad story doesn't erase the damage your policies have done." It hit like a slap. The audience let out a shocked, "Oh." Twitter blew up again. A Kamala cold trended instantly. But what Kamala didn't see was the producer offstage mouthing the words, "Too far." JD's lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in deep, visible hurt. He leaned forward slowly, his voice lower now. "You just turned a dying child's final wish into a talking point. I hope you realize the weight of that." Kamala blinked fast. For the first time, she looked unsure. JD didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her back. Instead, he turned to the audience. "My job isn't to outtalk you. My job is to outcare you, and no one outcares me when it comes to this country." Kamala turned away. But the moderator, staring wide-eyed at his notes, whispered into his mic, "Folks, this just became more than politics." As JD sat back, the camera caught something rare. A single tear. He wiped it quickly, but America saw it. And it wasn't weakness. It was raw humanity. At home, viewers leaned in. Many were already crying. But the story wasn't done unfolding. Because as JD stared into the studio lights, his mind went back to another moment, one that had shaped him forever. The year was 2004. JD was only 20, a Marine recruit, attending his mother's funeral. She had overdosed alone in a tiny house in Middletown, Ohio. He remembered holding her cold hand. Remembered wishing someone, anyone, had cared enough to help her before it was too late. Back then, he was poor, forgotten. No one on TV cared what happened to families like his. That's why he was in politics now. That's why Evan mattered. It wasn't just a debate for him. This was everything. Back in the studio, JD looked up again. "People like my mom and Evan don't make headlines. But they should. And if I'm hated for giving them a voice, so be it." The audience erupted in applause. Even Kamala lowered her eyes. Within minutes of JD's quiet statement about his mother and Evan, phones across America lit up. TikTok feeds were flooded with clips. One video, captioned, "This made me cry in front of my kids," crossed 2 million views in an hour. On Twitter, people from every political side echoed one truth. This didn't feel like politics. This felt like pain. But the most powerful moment? A woman named Teresa, a former social worker from Chicago, posted a shaky selfie video. Tears rolled down her face as she said, "My son died of fentanyl in 2022. I thought no one cared. JD just made me feel seen." That video alone pulled in 800,000 shares. Back in the green room, Kamala's team watched nervously. A young aide whispered, "This is going sideways." But JD wasn't celebrating. He sat still in his chair, eyes closed. He didn't want to win the night. He wanted the country to wake up. And deep down, Kamala knew the usual rules weren't working anymore. Because JD wasn't playing to beat her, he was playing to heal someone. The following morning, JD Vance sat alone in his DC office. No press briefings, no tweets, just silence. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a yellowed folded paper. It was a letter. The last one his mom had written before she died. Scrawled in trembling ink, it read, "I messed up more than I helped. But you still believed in me. One day, you'll stand for people like me. People no one wants to see. Don't let that heart of yours harden, JD, not even when they laugh." JD folded it slowly, pressing it to his chest. That night on stage, Kamala hadn't just triggered a political reaction. She had poked a buried wound that still bled quietly in private. But instead of bitterness, JD chose something else. He wrote one line on a sticky note and placed it above his desk. "Speak for the forgotten." Then he made a quiet call to Evan's mom. "We don't know everything they said." But she posted afterward, "JD didn't talk to me like a politician. He cried with me like a father." That post broke Instagram. The country was no longer watching a debate. They were watching a man carry a nation's grief. That evening, inside a luxury Georgetown townhouse, Kamala Harris sat with her inner circle. Polls were shifting, fast. She threw her phone across the table. "How the hell did we lose the room? I didn't even yell." Her chief strategist looked down. "It's not about volume anymore. It's about vulnerability. And he just beat you with it." Silence. Kamala stared at the television where JD was being interviewed. No gloating, no spin. Just soft words about Evan, about Ohio, about addiction, about forgiveness. The strategist continued, "You tried to corner him, but you didn't know what he was carrying." Kamala bit her lip, furious and confused. "I've faced Putin, Senate attacks, and 3 primaries, and this is what breaks the internet?" "No," the aide said carefully. "This is what heals it." Kamala didn't respond, but outside that townhouse, something bigger was brewing. A shift, a whisper, a new kind of politics. Not perfect, not polished, but human. And J.D. Vance had just lit the match. The day after the broadcast, a letter arrived at the vice president's office. It was written in crayon. On the front, a drawing. A stick figure man with tears, standing in front of a microphone. Above it, in shaky handwriting, "Dear Mr. Vance, thank you for crying." Inside was a note from a 10-year-old named Lucy in Dayton, Ohio. "My dad died of drugs too. I saw you on TV and you looked like how I feel inside. My mom says I'm strong, but I didn't feel strong until I saw you. You made me believe big people care." JD held the letter and didn't move for nearly 5 minutes. This wasn't a campaign anymore. This wasn't politics. It was purpose. Later that night, he mentioned Lucy at a town hall. His voice cracked, but he didn't hide it. He said, "If I had nothing left but her letter, I'd still have enough reason to keep going." And in that moment, across living rooms nationwide, people cried with him. Because Lucy wasn't just writing to the vice president. She was writing to the father figure America needed. Reporters swarmed his house. TV crews replayed the clip in slow motion. Hashtags like Vance Kamala and The Comeback exploded across platforms. But J.D. Vance? He kept his schedule simple. No new interviews, no Twitter storms, just quiet conversations in overlooked places. He met with rehab counselors in Kentucky, sat with single mothers in Cleveland. He even visited a fire station in West Virginia where overdose calls were more frequent than fire alarms. One firefighter, a father of 3, said, "Sir, I voted for someone else in 24, but that night on TV, you didn't talk like a suit, you talked like a dad." JD smiled. "I am a dad." And that was it. No speeches, no drama, just truth. Meanwhile, Kamala's campaign pushed out sleek ads, scripted rebuttals, flashy edits of the debate, but none of it could erase what people now felt. Because JD's comeback didn't go viral because it was clever. It went viral because it was honest. And honesty, in today's America, felt revolutionary. A week later, JD visited a small community church in Columbus, unannounced. He sat in the back pew quietly as a local pastor spoke about loss, hope, and healing. Then something unexpected happened. The pastor paused mid-sermon and said, "Mr. Vice President, would you like to say something?" JD hesitated. The room went still. He slowly stood up, took a breath, and said, "I didn't come here to speak. I came to listen. But I will say this. I used to think pain made us weak. Now I know it just makes us human." The room was silent, then sniffles, then someone whispered, "Amen." After the service, an elderly woman approached him. She said her grandson died from heroin last year. Then she hugged him and whispered, "You're the first politician who's ever made me feel heard. Thank you, JD." No cameras were there to catch it, no social media clips. But that moment, quiet, sacred, unfiltered, would later be retold by every person in that church. Because long before elections are won, hearts must be, and JD Vance had just won a few hundred more. 3 days after the debate, a photo quietly surfaced online. It wasn't shared by a campaign. It wasn't taken by a professional photographer. It was blurry, taken on a flip phone. But it spread like wildfire. In the photo, JD Vance stood alone at a cemetery in Middletown, Ohio, kneeling by a modest gravestone. No Secret Service, no staff, just him. The gravestone, his mother's. The caption, just 3 words, "He still visits." The story behind it hit hard. His mother, once consumed by addiction, had been buried quietly years ago, far from headlines. JD had rarely spoken publicly about her. But this photo told everything words couldn't. And as the image circled the internet, Kamala's debate comment, "You can't speak for broken families when you've always stood on the sidelines of pain," took on a haunting echo. Now people knew the truth. He hadn't stood on the sidelines. He had lived the pain. And in living it, he carried millions who still suffer from it. One image, one moment, and the narrative shifted overnight. JD sat in the quiet of his office, the storm of media still roaring outside. His phone buzzed. A message. It was from his 13-year-old son, Jack. "Dad, I saw the video. The whole school's talking about you. I've never said this before, but I'm really proud you're my dad. I love you." JD stared at the screen. This boy, his boy, had lived through the long nights, the missed dinners, the buried grief over JD's mother, his son's grandmother. Jack had heard the campaign attacks, the jokes, the memes. But now, after seeing his father not as a politician, but as a man fighting for what's right, everything had changed. JD didn't reply with a long message, just, "I love you too. Always." He sat there, eyes red, remembering a promise he made to himself when Jack was born. Break the cycle. Be the man she wished she could have raised. This wasn't about 2028 anymore. It was about Jack and every kid like him. And in that moment, JD Vance wasn't just vice president. He was the father of a movement. Kamala Harris was quiet. For nearly a week, her team begged her to respond, to post, to clarify, to spin the backlash. But she said nothing. Behind closed doors, she watched the debate clip again. Not the viral, edited versions, but the full footage. Raw. She watched her own face as she said the words. She watched JD's reaction. That stillness before the storm. And then she watched his comeback. "You want to talk about broken homes? I lived in one. You want to talk about addiction? I buried it. You want to talk about America's pain? I am its son." She closed the laptop. Kamala wasn't heartless. She knew she crossed a line, and not just politically. She had touched something sacred, something real, and she had underestimated him. Publicly, she stayed silent. Privately, her staff noticed something new: hesitation, humility, and late one night, a draft email was spotted on her screen. Just 4 words. To JD Vance, "I'm sorry." She hadn't hit send, but the fact she even typed it showed the impact was deeper than anyone imagined. The world had watched the fire, but only now were they beginning to feel the afterburn. The envelope had no return address. It was left at JD's office late at night by an anonymous staffer who said, simply, "You should read this alone." JD opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. Neat cursive, soft ink. It was from a woman in Atlanta. "Mr. Vance, I watched the debate. I watched what she said. And I watched you stand there, calm, firm, broken and unbreakable. I'm a single mom. My son's father died from fentanyl 3 years ago. I didn't think anyone in D.C. knew what it felt like to cry quietly in a bathroom so your kid doesn't hear. But when I saw your eyes, I knew you knew. Thank you. For carrying the pain we're too tired to shout about. Thank you for not flinching. Thank you for making me feel like I'm not invisible." JD folded the letter with trembling hands. One letter. One voice. One life touched. But it felt like a million. And in that moment, the cameras didn't matter. This was the reason he got into politics in the first place. The world was stunned when Kamala Harris walked onto the Senate floor that Wednesday morning. She held no notes. She wasn't smiling. And for the first time in months, she looked human. Vulnerable. C-SPAN was live. Every news outlet turned its lens toward her. She took a deep breath. "I've served this country for decades. I've debated tough opponents. But last week, I let ambition overpower empathy. I said something that crossed a line. I hurt a man who carries more than titles. He carries scars. JD Vance, if you're watching." "I'm sorry," gasps echoed. Even reporters froze mid-type. It wasn't politics anymore. It was human. JD was watching, alone in his office. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, as if saying, "Thank you." And just like that, something rare happened in American politics. Respect, between rivals, in public, on record. And that moment was shared by millions. 2 weeks after the debate, JD returned to Middletown, Ohio. Not for a rally, not for press. He walked into the old community center where he'd once volunteered as a teenager, back when his family had nothing. The staff had one request. Would he speak to a group of 5th graders? He smiled. Of course. He entered the room. Dozens of kids stared up at him. One little girl stood. Her voice shook. "Mr. Vance, why didn't you yell when she was mean to you?" He knelt beside her, placed a hand over his heart and said, "Because when you carry real pain, you don't need to shout. You just tell the truth and let it speak for itself." The room went silent. Not one child moved. Not one adult blinked. 30 seconds of pure, tearful silence. And somewhere in America, watching this clip on YouTube, a mother sobbed. A father paused. A child asked, "Who is JD Vance?" And millions now knew the answer. Slow music fades in. A black screen appears. Then the words. This wasn't just a debate. It was a mirror, reflecting who we are and who we want to become. Cut to JD Vance kneeling by the gravestone. Fade to black. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't leave without doing 3 things. Like, because truth needs light. Comment, because your voice matters. Subscribe, because more stories like this deserve to be heard. And if you cried, you're not alone. Tell us why in the comments. This is our America. Let's feel it. Let's heal it. Together.